and new. Whisper relieve me to keep your heart in tune. Guidance is prayer in the morning. Guidance is prayer and new. Guidance is prayer relieve me. So keep your heart in tune. Jesus may come in the morning. Jesus may come and new. Jesus may come in the evening. So keep your heart in tune.
Lord, you know I need a brand new touch. My strength from yesterday is gone. If you give me, Lord, another touch, I'll have the strength to carry on. I thought the sun had come to stay, but all too soon it went away. And in its place the storm clouds came, and with the clouds there came the rain. It rained so hard and all so long, but amidst the storm I felt a calm. It was your touch that brought me through it all. Without your help I should fall. Lord, you know I need a brand new touch. My strength from yesterday is gone. But if you give me, Lord, another touch, I'll have the strength to carry on. Yesterday has come and gone, and now a new day's come along. I do not know what it may bring. My heart may cry instead of sing. It matters not what comes my way, Lord, if you just touch me each day. I'm sorry, I forgot this the word. I do not. Let me sing that song. That chorus. Yesterday has come and gone, and now a new day's come along. I do not know what it may bring. My heart may cry instead of sing, but it matters not what comes my way, Lord, if you just touch me each day. Your loving touch drives all my fears away. Close by your side, I want to stay. Lord, you know I need a brand new touch. My strength from yesterday is gone. If you give me, Lord, another touch, I'll have the strength to carry on. Lord, you know how weak I really am, even better than myself. Oh wow, I'm really good today. Sorry. Lord, you know how weak I really am, even better than myself. But with your help, I know I really can make it through the darkest night. Everything is gonna be alright. Yes. Lord, you know I need a brand new touch. My strength from yesterday is gone. Lord, you know I need a brand new touch. My strength from yesterday is gone.
Amen. Praise the Lord.
Thank the Lord for being in Los Angeles again. It's good to see all of you all. And I am privileged to work with amazing young people. And I just thought about this song and thinking about my own life. Because when I was in trouble, I sing this a lot, but it's one of those songs that you think about it. When you were in trouble, and when people didn't always have the right answers for you, and how you survived as a young black man growing up, trying to get educated, suffering and struggling in school, having dyslexia, and people telling you you're unintelligent, you never get a college degree. I was in trouble. But the church and the community never gave up. You know, I appreciate Aunt Juanita and Uncle Leon, and when my dad couldn't find work, they worked for them. We could have hired a welder in Los Angeles, hired my dad in the high desert, make sure we have bread on our table. We were in trouble. But that's what the church is for. It's about supporting each other. And that's just one small element of how I was taken care of by the church community and by God and by those that love God and made sacrifices for me and my family, and I will never forget that. I will never forget that, where and how I was blessed, and I want to do that for someone else. I want to support the next generation, and that's why my commitment and my life sacrifice is for young people. So if you are ever in trouble in life, or you know the song, or can identify with it, I hope that you can either sing along or sing along in your heart. When I was in trouble, I learned Brother Cardinal sang this song in the pulpit, and I learned it from memory. I asked him where he learned it from. He learned it from his grandmother. And so the song is easy, 20 years old, post-slavery. And so it's an honor for me to sing the song, and I hope you can join me. When I was in trouble, my way was dark and night. Jesus gave me comfort and brought me to the light. He took away my sorrow, made my burden light. He is everything to me. If it wasn't for the Lord, tell me, what would I do? Please tell me, what would I do? Please tell me, what would I do? If it wasn't for the Lord, tell me, what would I do? He is everything to me. He gives bread in dry places and water in a thirsty land. He's my rock and shelter, and he holds me by the hand. And when my friends forsake me, close by my side he'll stand. Everything to me. If it wasn't for the Lord, tell me, what would I do? Please tell me, what would I do? Please tell me, what would I do? If it wasn't for the Lord, tell me, what would I do? He's everything to me. And when my life is ended and I must surely die, he will be my gateway up to the Lord high. And in that golden city, there'll be no sad goodbyes. He is everything to me. If it wasn't for the Lord, tell me,
so I don't know the words to it. Still trying to get the words. My precious Lord, take my hand and lead me, Lord. My precious Lord, take my hand and show me the way, Lord. My precious Lord, my precious Lord, lead me, Lord. I know not the way, my precious Lord. My precious Lord, my precious Lord, hold my hand and take me, Lord. My precious Lord, my precious Lord, take my hand. Show me the way, Lord, my precious Lord, my precious Lord.
Precious Lord. I do know a precious Lord from today on, but it sounds a little different. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to sing it, okay? But I'm going to try to get you the word. God bless you. The Lord looks at our heart. No matter what we do, when we sing from our heart. And that's what the Lord is concerned about. It's what we do from our heart. We heard the whisper of prayer. We heard, I need another touch. Was it another touch? We need a brand new touch. And then we had the song that Brother Aaron sang, When I Was in Trouble. And I'm saying that with all of this, we had a precious Lord lead me. And I want to say, I want to thank the Lord for all of this. I want to thank the Lord for what He's done for me. And I don't know how to say thanks. He done so much for me. I don't even know how to thank Him. I just don't know how to thank the Lord. He's done so much for me. How can I say thanks for all you've done for me? Life so undeserved, but you gave your precious life for me. The voices of a many angels cannot express my gratitude. All I am, and I hope to be, I owe it, dear Lord, to thee. To God be the glory. To God be the glory. To God He has done. Just let me live my life. Let it be pleasing, dear Lord, to Thee. And if I gain any praise, let it go to Calvary. Oh, with His blood, He has saved me. With His power, my God has raised me. To God be the glory for the thing He has done. Oh, to God be the glory for the thing He has done.
Amen. God be the glory. I'd like to thank everyone. Beautiful songs. Had message in song. Now we're going to have the Word of God. Thank the Lord for each and every one of you.
Thank the Lord for His faithfulness to us all. Appreciate the privilege of being in the house of God. We thank the Lord for the presence of everyone. Thank the Lord. We are blessed. We've been blessed. And we're persuaded that we're loved by God. Thank the Lord. We're thankful that God has honored us with His presence, has allowed us to be in the house of God. Thank the Lord for those that were able to come out to the service. Appreciate our visitors, our children, and everyone else in between. We thank the Lord. Thank the Lord for His faithfulness in allowing us to hear the gospel in this generation. And we have heard it in song, and our desire is that the Lord will bless it in His word. I appreciated the song, each and every song. I appreciate that Leah is able to remind us to whisper a prayer. Sometimes we think we can do it all ourselves, but God designed it that we could be blessed by Him when we humble our hearts, and that can come as simply as whispering a prayer. We thank the Lord. And that's so important for all of us. If any of us have children that we're teaching about God, whether it's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, that is an important example to teach them the importance of whispering a prayer. Because they can carry that with them long after you're gone, that God can answer prayer. And when we have that understanding, that's a gift no one can take from us. I used to teach my children when they were in school, and there were various situations that they experienced. And I said, well, there's some things that people may not acknowledge, but they cannot take back from you. What God has blessed you with, they cannot take it. So it's important for us to always understand and acknowledge God. When I thought about it, blessed by the next song, I need to touch. The greatest blessings you can have is a divine touch. One of the greatest blessings, that means you're having a direct connection with God. And our battle sometimes can be great enough we can't even figure out how to share it. But God can give us a touch. And hopefully not to weary you, but I remember when I was so gravely ill, I just have to think the little bit of ability I had and strength. God have mercy on me. And one of the songs, maybe that one, was mentioning through the night. And being able to wake up that next morning, that was a blessing. A great blessing. Probably one I'd taken for granted, raising my children. And, it's time to get up and let's get the day going. And it doesn't stop till you go to bed, but you get low enough. And as my son would tell me, he was my caretaker. He said, Mommy, I would come in and wake you up to see if you were alive. And I guess that's how shallow my heart was beating. He couldn't tell I was alive. But a divine touch. Because I remember telling the Lord, I said, Lord, over there where the individual had dropsy, and dropsy is when your heart is quitting and you're sitting to death. I said, you just spoke the word. You just spoke it. And I'd read that in years past, but I had realized that could apply to me until I found myself in that place. And I said, Lord, you can just speak the word. What am I to God? So when we have efforts in life, we're living, working, it's important to preserve those things that we cannot do without. We cannot sacrifice. There are some things that we should never give up. And when we understand what that is, the beginning of that understanding is knowing that what is good for your soul, you don't sacrifice. You don't let anyone take it away. You don't compromise it. And the question is, what is good for the soul? Well, the soul is spiritual, divinely blessed by God. It's a connection we have with God. So anything that would break that spiritual connection with God is not good for the soul. And so we want to focus on what is good for the soul. And I often like to think of this when I had a professor, and then other information. You've heard me share this before, I believe. I'm sure you have, I believe. I had a professor who, I guess it was a science class, but it seemed like it was a lecture hall. But that didn't stop him from getting our attention riveted. He was giving us a lesson about the human brain. And he brought a brain to the class. Physical brain, put them up on the table up front. And the contrast between the two was significant enough from our seats in the lecture hall, at least I was probably sitting relatively close, but I imagine everyone could see, were different colors. One was pink and I guess healthy looking, and the other one was dark, kind of like hemorrhaging fluid. And it's amazing to look at the brain, and they were so different. And what he explained to us is that this one brain that looks healthy, like you would expect even if you cut your finger or something, you expect it to be healthy inside. He said this brain was from someone that was in an accident and they died, but their brain was healthy when they died. The other one, and when I say accident, I don't know how they died, but I'm assuming an accident. And the other one, he said, is the brain of an alcoholic. I thought, my goodness, alcohol will do that kind of damage to the brain. So this is an alcoholic, and it had dark hemorrhaging throughout the brain. And then at a later time, I heard a doctor sharing, and he said, I teach my 2-year-old not to consume anything that's not good for the brain. Well, when you understand that everything you eat is directly impacting the brain, then it gives you a carefulness. And he said, even my 2-year-old, he said, you don't eat that. That's not good for your brain. Because whatever we consume will affect our brain. Some of us are sharp with math and probably like my mother, and some are good readers. I love reading. I started reading when I was probably 5 years old or so, or whenever they gave me a book and told me these were words. I've been reading ever since. And I was an avid reader. But all of that is impacted. That ability is how we have supported our brain. In other words, it can be impacted in a little child. Not wait till we're 80 or 90 years old, but you can be 9 months or 9 years. What you consume impacts your brain. And when you understand that, then there's more of a carefulness. And I often share, I don't know how often, but I share from time to time with people that we train our children what to eat. Now, if you give them, if you don't spend time giving them a lot of candy, in other words, it's more of a reserved or special time, their appetite is adapted to carrot sticks and broccoli and all those things. Children eat them and love them because their appetite has developed. And that's so important because it's good for the brain. When you see children that have stamina and have various abilities, it's because their parents have given them something that supports them. And the same way, we'll parallel, Lord willing, throughout the message, the same way with our soul. There are things that we can expose our soul to that is harmful. And there are things we can expose our soul to that is good. That will continue to prep us and prepare us to make heaven our home. And from where I sit in many situations, what I'm saying is I don't have children in school, but I did for many, many years. It seemed like it was going to go on forever, but all of a sudden it's all finished, it stopped, and we don't have that anymore. The same way, but when they were born, I thought someday I'm going to get enough rest. But that stopped too. Matter of fact, that changed. I would get up early in the morning with my children. I've shared this, I believe. And I would sing them each awake. I'd stand by the door and sing until they were awake, and I'd go to the next door. And I hadn't really stopped to think how they felt about me singing them awake until I stopped. And my daughter said, Mommy, why did you stop singing us awake? I said, oh, well, Bryce, when he got into 6th grade or 7th grade, it seemed like it was 6th grade, he decided he would set a clock, wake himself up, and he woke everyone up. Even though he was about 10 or 11, he decided he would take that responsibility. I said, so I didn't have to anymore. She said, so it's Bryce's fault. But the point is, and that's when I realized how much it meant to them. But I began that because over the years, particularly when you're in a large family, people have odd and uncomfortable ways of waking you up. They might come in and yell real loud or shake you or whatever it is. They don't mean harm. They just figure the quicker they get you awake, they can go on to the next person. But I never liked that. And so I began to think, how can I wake my children the way I would want to wake up? And so that's when I began. I'd go to their door early in the morning, sing until they say, okay, Mommy, I'm awake, and then I'd go to the next door. And that was how I woke them up. But the point is, it's patterns we set that support righteousness. That's what we want to focus on. There's things that support righteousness. We may take it for granted that, well, someday I'm going to pray, and my children know that they can pray. Or someday I'm going to go to church, and they'll understand that. Or someday I'm going to sit down and spend some time with their older grandparents or their elderly neighbor or whoever it is,
but someday may be too late. In other words, these are behaviors that you want to introduce your family to that they can grow with. It's very important because we're living in a time when people like to set people aside. They like to decide, we don't need that anymore, we don't need to do this. And being that God gave us that strength and ability, it's kind of amazing that we think it comes from us. God has given. God has given all of our abilities, and we want to use our abilities to the glory of God. And so all those things that are good for the soul, we want to work and nurture is the word. Nurture those things. The same way when there are certain foods that are good for the body. And when my children were growing up, we didn't have fancy food. I love tasty food. But we have, potatoes and rice and sweet potatoes and broccoli and vegetables and mixed vegetables. That was a common behavior almost any meal. We didn't have a lot of shrimp. I love shrimp, but I stopped eating it a long time ago because I would react to it every time I ate it. But the point I'm saying is we didn't try to focus on gourmet. We gave them what was good for them. And so I never allowed a child to say, when I served them, I don't want that. That's nasty. That wasn't a word they would ever allow. I said, I don't serve nasty food. The only food I serve is healthy food. I said, and you will eat it. If it doesn't make you sick, you will eat it. There was no choice. They ate it, or else they went without. I said, your father worked, and we bought this food, and you're going to eat it. This is your option. Because I knew it was good for them. And so I spent time teaching them. So I didn't have children that was picky eaters. I monitored them from birth to see if there was anything they had a reaction to. If they didn't, they ate what I served. But the point is, I didn't serve them junk. I tried to serve them good food. It was simple. For breakfast, my husband liked sunny side up or over easy, and he liked the yolk intact. Now, for some people, if you didn't grow up eating that might be a little traumatizing to you. But he loved that. And so I would put it on a toast with the yolk still perfectly intact. And I'd serve them each a toast, and they said, don't nobody burst my yolk. I want to open it myself. And they wanted to run all over their toast. But the point is they adapted to eating healthy. And I would serve oatmeal, and if I was really rushing, and I don't know if anyone's done this, I'd crack the egg and cook it in the oatmeal while the oatmeal was cooking, because I wanted them to have sufficient protein for the day. And so my point is, that's how they ate. They ate not fancy. There was one cereal my youngest son loved, but I didn't often get, cold cereals. I got them, but I preferred oatmeal because I wanted them to be able to make it through the day. And then when I had athletes, I would monitor what they ate, even if they didn't know. Because when they get out there on the field running, they have to have something that's going to keep them going. And so I would give them basic food, and not only that, I didn't stop with that. I'd go watch them. Want to see what their abilities were, whether they were making it or not. And I remember watching, I don't think they do it anymore now, back then, before they start losing so many athletes, they used to have them have what they call double days. And that would usually be in the heat of the summer in August. And some would collapse and what have you. I'm assuming they stopped. I think they were talking of stopping. Anyway, but I would go watch them to see if the food I was feeding them was making a difference. I actually did that. And I remember they'd have to run that whole field. And so they'd say, run down to the end and back. I think it was, 100 yards? And I'd see my son, he'd just leap out in front of them, running almost by himself. And so he said, I didn't even know I had that much strength. That was after a workout. He said, I didn't know I had that much strength left. But as a mother, that's why I was there, to see if what he was eating was good for his body. And I'm just a mother feeding my child. But God is feeding our soul. And he wants the Word of God and our lives to be benefited by what is good for our soul. And it doesn't begin too early. Just like that surgeon, I believe it was the surgeon, said, I teach my 2-year-old not to eat anything that would harm their brain. So when we understand that it does make a difference, that this is not something that is a light thing, then we will turn our minds toward our soul and what we consume every day. The interesting thing about the soul is what's inside of us, our attitude affects the welfare of our soul, but what we take in affects the welfare of our soul, what we consume. And we are in a time now that a 3-year-old can access the world on a smartphone. And so it's important for us to affect and control this environment. And I was in one of those mothers when my last 2 or 3 children, 3, maybe more, were coming into older teenage. That's when Facebook and the persons, when you have sites, and everybody, these little teenagers all had their site, and I said, well, I'm sorry, when you become adult, you have that privilege, but not in my home. You're just too young. And of course, over and over and over, till it's gotten almost something we just take in stride. Many young people are seduced and gotten in deep trouble just by going online. Too young. And so it's important that we are aware of what we consume, not just our children, but ourselves. Because if it's not good for the soul, that means it's harmful for the soul. And we're in a world, insight and knowledge and understanding is important, because just to survive in this world, we have to have that. And we are responsible for what we're exposed to and what we allow to be exposed. A lot of people like to say, oh, that's okay, they can go down the street or even at school and they can find it. My opinion about that is, well, it won't be found here. It's important that we understand that God is holding us responsible for what we expose the soul to. And it's critical because, you see, God is the one that blesses us. What did the song say? A touch. God is the one that gives us that touch. If we want the liberty of God touching us, then it's important that we respect and honor his instructions and his God. God is not backwards. There's nothing going on in the world today that he doesn't understand. There's nothing going on that man thought of first, even though they think they did. In other words, it's fascinating. All of us can blink our eyes right here and thank the Lord. And I remember my first child was born, and they sent papers home with you to give you instructions. And they said, and your little one is going to, their tear ducts haven't opened yet. And so they may cry, but no tears come out yet. They haven't opened. But after a little while, a few days, I don't know if it was a week or two, their tear ducts open and they start crying. And they have this instruction. And once their tear ducts open, they will be able to cry. And they will cry every day for probably until they're grown almost. There'll be a reason to shed a few tears. But the marvel of that came from God. That came from God. That I thought, wow, you mean, and I look at, oh, I guess they aren't crying tears yet. And then after a while, they're crying tears. The reason I say this, these are things that man spends a lot of time saying, I have some this to put in your eyes, and it'll do this, and it'll do that. But God was the master of that. And then as our children grow, we want to give them proper food. And back in the 60s, I guess, I mean, I don't know the years right, they told all the mothers and fathers, you can free up your life. Feed them formula. You can feed them formula. We have tested it. We have put in it all those things that are good for it. And there are sometimes mothers are ill, and that's a blessing to have formula. But the truth is, God had the ideal formula. He knows all the ingredients. He prepared it. And you can have a sickly little baby, a premature baby, but you give him his mother's or her mother's milk. And it's amazing what they will do. And I remember when my mother said my youngest sister was born, she was premature, I think 2 months. And they said, well, we're going to have to get special bottles. The reason they say that, many of you may know this, if a baby's premature, his sucking reflexes haven't fully developed. And so they have a special little bottle that'll just kind of push the milk in until they learn to suck. Well, the doctor was explaining to her all of this about her new little premature baby. And she said, hand me my baby. And they did. And she put it to the breast and she just started sucking away. The point is, God mastered all of this, and God can touch whatever is needed as trusting saints of God. And that was the formula God created. And she grew and grew well, and I'm 5'6½", and even for the 50s, that's have a little height, but she's 5'9", that little premature baby. The point is, we want to visualize things we take for granted. God has already taken care of it. We're living in a time of major, incredible processes that have taken place. And when you look at certain buildings and ships and cars, they may have 250,000 wires when they're all hooked up. But God has processed this, created this, long before that. How many yards of blood vessels do we have in our body? How many bats of the eye in a minute? How many breaths do we take? And we may think we're taking those breaths, but I found out that's divine. Because I got where I couldn't take breath. And I'd sit there gasping, I don't know how long, until my husband would wake up or come in where I was, and he'd lay his hands on me and pray until God gave me breath. And we may think our little breath, if I can take a breath when I want, it's divine. But what is good for the soul and what is good for the body are critical and within our ability to affect it. God has given us that ability. He's given us the ability to work on these things. So our overarching theme and thought is what is good for the soul, we're going to reach out for that. It can happen every day. And what is good for the body, we're going to consider that. What is good? And I remember I was so frail and not receiving, barely able to receive nutrition because I wasn't eating. But what I did eat, we realized even if it was a tablespoonful, it needed to count. And so my sister shared, and I think I read it too, but I know she shared. She said, we all use microwaves in this generation for everything. She said, but microwave takes the nutrition out of the food. And I thought, well, if I'm just eating a tablespoonful, this sure doesn't need to be microwaved. And so I got up where I could eat 2 tablespoonfuls, but we didn't microwave anything because we wanted it to count. And so, and I still don't use a microwave. And so, in other words, Ann and Al and I have something in common. They don't use one either. But the point is, microwave is a fast option, and it's so convenient, but if you need nutrition, you need to try to move away from that. In a dire emergency, maybe it's out of your control, I don't know. But I came to realize that the microwave was robbing me. Not only was it not good for my body, it definitely wasn't good for my brain because I was so fragile. But the Lord gave it back and gave me strength and gave me breath. And I guess for, I don't know, a year, I guess I couldn't lay down. And even now, I'll lay back on my back and say, Lord, I thank you. I can breathe. I can lie here and breathe. And so it's important for us to understand that however young we are, we listen to our parents to guide us with what to eat. And as we get older, maybe we don't know what to eat. You can ask the Lord. He can guide you. There are some things that are good for you, but maybe you hadn't realized it, how important that food is. Well, spiritually, it's the same way. That song that Leah sang this morning, Whisper a Prayer, that's good for the soul. That is good to go through every day, each day. Because we don't know what we're going to experience. We don't know what's going to happen. And think about, we know the story of Zacchaeus. Some people say Zacchaeus. In the New Testament, when we read in Luke, he was a man with means. Some of his means were ill-gained. But because he was in a position of authority, he used that to gain and get ahead. And in certain societies, and even in this one, but in certain societies, particularly early societies, there was a definite line between the rich and the poor. And Zacchaeus had experienced a way to make himself extra rich. This is Luke 19. We'll begin reading at the first chapter. Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. We heard that before recently, haven't we? And he was rich. He sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was of little stature. In other words, Jesus came walking through town, probably through the main street, and as he came walking through the town, people probably whispered to others and ran over and told their neighbor, this man Jesus is coming into town. So people came out of their houses and maybe out of their fields, gathering to see Jesus. Well, Zacchaeus did the same thing, except he was a short man. In other words, I suspect he was probably, I would think, a little shorter than me. Because, as I said, generally, I'm classified at least as average or slightly tall for a female. And they sought to see Jesus, who he was, could not for the press, because he was little of stature. I mean, he was just short. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. Well, that was a smart idea. And he said, well, I can't stand on my toes. And he ran, and so evidently he could run, ran ahead and climbed the sycamore tree. And a sycamore tree, I don't know how often we have them around us here, but they were definitely there in Jericho. And I think I've heard it said those trees are difficult to climb, that they had, and the way the bark was and so forth, they were difficult to climb. And when I was a girl, I didn't climb a whole lot of trees, but the one I climbed counted was our mulberry tree. It actually wasn't mine, it was my cousin's, but everybody in the neighborhood thought it was all the neighborhoods, but it wasn't. But we'd run down there, and if you could get out of school early, I remember going there by myself. And a low branch, I could get a seat, and I could just reach and get mulberries here and mulberries there. But that was easy for me to climb. I was a child. But the sycamore tree probably was kind of straight, didn't have a lot together to hold on to, but he was earnest to find out who Jesus was. And actually, that's an important behavior, that we want to know more about God. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him. And Jesus will do that for us. He looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, for today I must abide at thy house. Wow. That's amazing that Jesus knew what was in Zacchaeus' heart. He knew what was there, and not only that, he didn't miss him. And just like Jesus didn't miss Zacchaeus, he won't miss us either. In other words, if we're seeking those things that are spiritual, Jesus will connect with us. And he made haste, came down, received him joyfully, and when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. Now we know elsewhere in the scripture Jesus said he came to save that one which is lost. But anyway, 8th verse, Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Now remember the first verse or so, we said he was rich. Some of his richness was from his work. The other was from charging people falsely. And that was not good for the soul, and if he hadn't found Jesus and hadn't corrected it, Zacchaeus would have been lost. But by hearing Jesus giving instructions to the people, he realized he needed to make some things right. Again, the 8th verse. And Zacchaeus stood, said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And that is good for the soul. Now, many times we feel like we have been very successful if we have taken something of someone or said something that offended them, and we try to find them and just say, I'm sorry. But what he said is, I'll do it fourfold. And this is good for the soul. I would tell my children, and this is instructions I would give to any child in my care, is that when you cause someone to cry, and they're hurting, or whatever the distress is, you have to hug them or kiss them until they stop crying. You can't just say, I'm sorry, and keep going. You want to do those things that are good for the soul, that God puts his stamp on, that God will give you in return a blessing. And so he said, I restore him fourfold. Years ago, I've told you the story, I believe, I'm pretty sure, of a time when I lived in a neighborhood there in Pomona, and I liked our street because there were several mothers that were home. It was a lovely little street, and we knew each other. And matter of fact, if someone strange came walking down the block, and it was a full block, the dog would start barking. You know, it was a stranger in the neighborhood, not in your yard, just in the neighborhood. And I loved that street. But anyway, things came up, and someone accused me because I had asked a neighbor to watch my children. I was expecting. And children were not allowed to go to the doctor's office. So for that trip, until my daughter could get home, I asked a neighbor to watch. And my daughter was watching my younger children. And while she was watching, one of them fell and bumped their head. It doesn't have to be a real hard bump on the head for it to be blood. They're close to the surface, God made it that way. And so she was bleeding, and my daughter, who was, I felt very wise, went to the older neighbor next door and asked her if she could help her with my daughter's head. And she did. But between 2 or 3 neighbors, they began to gossip about me. And so they gossiped to the point that someone might have said they were going to call Child Protective Services. I had never even heard of that. I didn't know who that was or what it was, but there was no harm. I thought if someone wanted me to care for my children, the first place to start was with me. But anyway, the point I'm saying is that it became a situation, and I began to pray about it. And I called my sister Juanita and asked her to be in agreement of prayer with me, because the children had been neglected. I felt like my daughter was wise, and I felt like my neighbor supported her. But sometimes people get a little caught up and like to gossip a little bit. Whatever the case, it was escalating. And I had a neighbor across the street who only had an older teenage son. He was probably at school. I went over and I said, are you the one concerned about my children? She says, no. I said, well, someone told me that they were going to call Child Protective Services. I don't know if I even said it correctly, but she knew what I was speaking of. And she said, if they do, I will be angry. That's outrageous. And some of my children, older ones, had been complimented on their behavior. But let's get on with the story. And so I began to pray, and I went to pick up my son, who was in afternoon kindergarten. And as I was walking, I prayed. But the Lord spoke to me and revealed to me who was the perpetrator. And it was amazing. And so, and I had called my sister and asked her to be in agreement with me. And as I walked home, the Lord let me know which neighbor had started. And so I went home. I wasn't planning on doing anything at that point. And again, well, let's see if we can not get ahead of ourselves. So this neighbor called me. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I still remember the time. She said, are you sitting down? I said, yes. Are you busy? I said, I can talk to you because I appreciate it. And I'd like to point out at this time, I didn't have a phone in my house. Our phone was off. And that was when my husband was making that transition. His company closed and started working for my brother-in-law. So I asked my neighbor, someone I was counseling, I said, in an emergency, can they call you and you give me a message to pray for this person? She said, yes. Well, as it turned out, this person began to call my neighbor, and that's where the stories began. But she called me this day, the day that I was praying, and we had an agreement of prayer. She said, I want to tell you something. And I said, yes. She said, I want you to know I'm sorry. And I thought, well. She said, well, I'm sorry because I went to our other neighbor who was in front of us. I was at a T, a street this way and one right in the middle. And the one on the leg of the T, I went to her and told her what all I had done to you. And she said, you go tell her everything you've done because she's a good woman. And so the way she starts, she says, Alice, you're my friend. And I want to ask you to forgive me. And I am sorry. And she told the whole story about how it had all transpired and what part she had in it. And I said, you don't owe me an apology. I said, I need to apologize to you for putting that burden on you to use your phone. She said, no, you didn't do anything. She said, I did. And I am sorry. The reason I'm sharing this detail, sometimes we're careless about correcting things. We're careless about when we found we've made a mistake. And so I felt bad that I put her in that place. She said, oh no, you don't owe me an apology. I owe you one, and I am sorry. I'm trying to say it like she did. And I realized this is how you apologize. That is good for the soul. God will lift all responsibility. He'll begin to heal it and take care of it. And no matter how I apologized to her, she didn't accept it. She said, you don't owe me one. No, she wasn't holding me. She said, you don't owe me one. I owe you an apology. You see, when we take care of things like that, our soul can grow and do well. And so it's important that we are conscientious when we stand before God, before you talk to anyone else and hear what he's revealing to you about your soul. You want what is good for your soul. And not only that, when I listened at her, there was a place for me to humble, and I did, and that's why I said that. I said, I am sorry for putting this burden on you. But the main thing we want to understand is that my soul came out in a healthy place. My soul was acceptable before God. Now, we have many things. I remember I was fascinated many years ago, maybe decades now, maybe that they were going to put sensors on the soldiers so that if they went down, they would be able to track them where they were. I remember hearing that. I don't know, I want to say 20 years ago, but I don't know. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Out on the battlefield, and they'll be able to track them. Well, thank goodness, because I don't know how long they've been lost otherwise in certain situations if they got separated. But God had this ability since the world began. And so we have access to the most sophisticated equipment that is divine. So we want to utilize that. When God reveals to us something in our lives is not pleasing him, the first place we go is back to him. And humble ourselves before him and ask him to forgive us and give us strength to correct it. Or if there's a situation, sometimes God prompts us just to pray about it. All of this is good for the soul. And so it's important for us to understand there are times that some people say, oh, well, that don't count. That's not that important. It's not like somebody's going to die or lose money. But if it's not good for your soul, you do need to take care of it. And so there are no detections that are known to man that God hasn't already had available to us. Because there are times, and that's why the scripture supports to sit quiet, because that's soul time. When God will reveal some thoughts you had that you didn't realize that God or anyone else was quite aware. And he'll say, I don't want that in your heart. I don't want you thinking like that. I want you to utilize your ability to call on me, and I'll route it out. I'll get it out. My husband used to talk about his wells, and they were pretty, but one of his greatest trademarks is that it was pretty inside the well. And he said, after they welled, and this amazed me, he said they put an ultrasound on it. I thought the same thing we do looking at babies. He said, yes, because they want to see if there's any inclusions. But see, that's sophisticated, but God's been doing that a long time. He will reveal to us what is inside and what may harm our soul. And so, when we understand that, then we understand what was going on with Zacchaeus. That Jesus came by, knew he was there, knew he was seeking him, and he said, not only do I know you're seeking him, he didn't say that, but this is what he said, I'm going to your house. God will come to our house because our soul is too precious. He doesn't want any carelessness with our soul. And when we think about it, and the experience, included that with my neighbor, the experience I had with that dear neighbor is I've never forgotten that. And I've never forgotten how humble she was. I'm not aware, but I don't know whether she was a Christian or not. But she behaved at that time like one. And no one should beat us behaving like a Christian. We should be able to ask God, is there another step you want me to have here? There are times we have to be maybe a little chastising. I told you the story of years ago. I happened to look out and see about at least four little boys chasing after one little boy. And I went out in the street and I said, you all stop that. My children said, Mommy, come back in, stop. Don't go out there. They might turn on you and throw rocks. I said, that's all right. I said, I'm a little bit bigger than that little boy. He might have been 9 and they were in 8. And I went out, I said, no, you stop that. You all quit chasing him. Doesn't matter what he did. 4 on 1 is not a proper ratio. And so the point is, God wants to direct us, affect us. In other words, there are places we have to stand before God and before man, and it may feel a little bit shaky, but I wasn't about to let that little boy, if they had enough rocks, they could have almost stoned him. But the point is I felt like I was in a position to respond to it. We want to hold our soul precious. That's our burden. Hold it precious so that when God reveals himself to us, we can hear him. It's not a matter of, I was watching. You can't even watch like God can. It's important for the only person that can come close to that is you listening to God. But there are people that watch and they don't quite succeed. Jesus said unto them, this day is salvation come to this house. For so much as he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. And when we understand how much we are loved, how much God has made available to us, they have lie detector tests. I don't know that I've ever participated in one, but I've seen them. And I don't know how effective they are because I don't know whether people are, when they talk about it, how correct they are, but they say that they're sensitive. And you can put your own lie detector test, and if you're not telling the truth, it'll show it up. Guess who had that a long time ago? God did. God will reveal to us. And you didn't quite say it right. Yes, Lord. You're doing better. We're still working. Okay, now you've gotten that. God has had that since the world began. And so, this is what I often share. We are serving the Most High God, most able,
Amen.
one who loves our soul.
Yes.
Now, parents love their children. God put that in their heart. You may wonder, as my mother used to tell, and some people, I hope don't get offended when I share it, I like to tell it because I was so loved. My mother said, they said you were so funny looking, me, but I looked like a squirrel. And she would tell that story. She said, I loved my baby. And I'd love to hear her tell it because I believe she loved me. I really did. And I realized it didn't matter what it looked like, my mother loved me. And so the point is, though, people will do that about someone else's child, but you look at their child, and maybe they look a little different too. We all look different. And they love their child. But God loves us, and he created us. And when you have God, it's amazing how beautiful you become. Not just in the inside, on the outside too. And so my mother used to tell me that, and I get fascinated that my mother loved me. It didn't matter what I looked like, she loved me. And she would do the very best for me. You know the story in Solomon's day when the 2 women came and one rolled on the baby in the night and it died, and so she took the other mother's baby She said it was hers, and she kept insisting, this is mine. What I conclude from that, the babies must have been very young. And so Solomon said, all right, you give me a sword. I'll cut it in half, and each of you can have a part of this baby. And so the mother whose child it was just yelled out, no, just give it to her, don't cut it. And he said, here, take your baby. He knew she was the mother. The point I'm saying is that there's a deep, innate love that parents have for their children. But God has that for us. And he wants the very best for us. So we need to tie into what God has to protect our soul, so that our soul will do well, that we can understand. You say, well, that part I don't understand. I've talked many times, I believe, I know I've thought it, that what you don't understand is not where we're focused. What you do understand is where we're focused. And you take care of that, and God will reveal some more to you. God will reveal what is right to you. He says, well, I didn't know I had a brother who had a great big voice. I think that runs in our family. And he would talk real loud, and we were close. And I said, well, you sound almost like you're mad. He said, no, I'm not mad. I'm just passionate about what I'm saying. And I'd be almost in tears. Well, he had to kind of adapt his speech just a little bit, that he wasn't so boisterous when he talked. He said, I'm not mad. I'm just trying to say with passion what I'm talking about. My point is, there are behaviors we have, and we just think it's okay because that's just the way we are. But is God talking to you about it? That's what you have to take note of. He may be talking to you about this thing, and then at a later time he'll talk to you about something else. But if God, who is the ruler of this universe, the maker of the soul, the lover of the soul, is pricking you about something in your life, then it's important that you understand. Because your soul is at stake. And when you, just a brief touch back to the professor, that brain that he had of the alcoholic, I don't know what level of alcohol this man drank, but he just about destroyed his brain. And if we're not careful, we can destroy our soul. But our burden is that we choose to follow God in a very sensitive way, understanding, and I think you heard me say this, our soul is in our hands. It's in our hands. And there is no invention, even in 2015, even when they're going to the moon and talking about other planets and all the ability, there is nothing known to man that is more sophisticated than the relationship of God with our soul. God holds it precious, it will never be destroyed, and so it's in our hands to protect it, to bring ourselves close to God, to honor God with our behavior. And that begins even with our thoughts that no one else knows about. That's where it begins. And so therefore, and babies are a good monitor. Babies don't sit here next to you and respond to you. Babies respond to your spirit. And if you come up to them and they perceive that you are, and I don't mean all babies have to love you or whatever. I love babies so they figure it out real quick. But what I'm saying is, some people don't want, some of my children at first, when they grew up, they didn't want to touch babies. I might break them or something. But the point I'm saying, though, just in general, babies will respond to you. Babies and dogs respond to me. And I like dogs, but I don't like touching dogs. And so, but I really like dogs. And so often over the years, my husband and I would be standing together, and a dog would approach us, and they'd come around, stand next to me. And I said, why is this dog here? I said, I know we have some dogs at home. I finally figured out it wasn't that. They perceive your spirit, and they decide that you're, not a challenge to them. But babies will do the same thing. I've had people say over and over and over again, and I don't reach for someone's baby. I'm very careful, because I don't feel that they should be imposed on by a stranger. But if I stand there long enough, the babies will reach for me, and then I'll take them. And they say, oh my word, they don't do that with anyone else. And I haven't told my secret. My mother had that ability with babies. And I told you the year, well, in fact, it was the year when the Johnson's daughter went with us to Monarch. My mother was under the pavilion. She's probably like me. When you get in those humid climates, you better be still somewhere. But anyway, and I remember approaching the pavilion, and there was these line of children going on down the aisle. I wonder why these children are still in here. And when I finally got where I could see, they were all lined up to speak to my mother. And of course, they didn't know her, but somehow they perceived. And that wasn't the first time, but I remember that time. And so I said, Lord, this may have been after my mother passed, I can't remember. I said, but if you just give me half of that blessing, that love and connection with children, I'll feel blessed. Because children were drawn to my mother. And I said, if I just have half of that. And I believe the Lord did that. Because I love children and children love me. But the point we want to say, though, what makes the difference is our soul, the spirit that we are of, that God has created and God is seeking to guide us. If there's something in your spirit that God is not pleased with, you don't have to tell me. You can tell God. When you mean it, believe me, He knows it. You tell Him. And if there's something that He is touching on your heart that you need to stop doing, you need to hear that. If there's something He said you need to start doing, you need to do that. If you need additional prayer, the altar is open. This is a place of support. But there is our desire and our will is to please God. Not to support sin, not to support anything that will take away from the Spirit of God. This is very, very important. So if you want to utilize and say you're aware of the amazing electronics we have, just tap into God. There is nothing more amazing than God's love for you. Nothing. It absolutely isn't. And He wants only what is good for your soul. And if there are those that are taunting you or putting pressure on you, the world is full of that. People like to manipulate other people. Tell God. So they're just pressing me and, Lord, I don't know what to do. Someone told me they were in a situation, so I don't know what to do. And so the Lord told them what to do. And they said, oh, yes, I'll do that. They were amazed and thankful. And God will do just like that because your soul is too precious. What is good for your soul is where you want to focus. Our desire is that God will bless you because we are living in a time that's similar to when Peter was in prison. The saints were all praying. Nobody knew how he was going to come out. So they told the Lord about it. The Lord answered. They were so shocked when He came to the door and knocked. They shut the door and ran away. He said, it's a man out there saying he's Peter. And it was Peter. There are places in our lives that are too big for us, but God is speaking to us to change it. We need to talk to God about it.
Yes, we do.
Look to Him to guide us out of it. Look to Him to bless us. And not only that, any children in our lives, let us ask God to make sure we are feeding them physically and spiritually what is good for their brain and what is good for their soul. I desire your prayers. I desire continued blessings from God. And this comes because God loves me and I love Him.
Amen.
It's a two-way street. And so we want God to reveal Himself to each of us so that we can experience an intimate relation with Him. And remember, like Ruth said to her mother-in-law Naomi, when she got ready to leave, her soul had perceived that her mother-in-law was a woman of God. And she said, go back to your family. I don't have any more sons. I'm making my way back home to another country. And she said, may God have mercy on me and do more, because thy God is my God, thy people is my people. And I like stories where they tell the beginning and the end. Let's read that. It's just a couple verses here. Over in Ruth. If you have it before me, it's Ruth 1:16. When Ruth perceived that her mother-in-law had to go back to her country, and she was going to be left there. Do you know what was causing her to cry out to her mother-in-law? Her soul. Her soul. In other words, her mother-in-law said, well, why did you stay here? I don't have any more sons for you to marry. But that wasn't why she wanted to go with her mother-in-law. It wasn't because she had more sons. She said, let me get it here. I got it. Ruth. Okay, read it, honey. 16, verse 16.
And Ruth said, treat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For with the Israel I will go, and where you go,
Lodges.
Lodges.
Lodge. It's an old-fashioned word for where you're going to stay. Go right ahead.
I will lodge with people shall be
My
my people, and thy God my God.
Yes. In other words, her cry to her mother-in-law was for her soul's sake. Where thou diest will I die, and I will be buried. The Lord do so to me and more also, if aught but death part thee in me. And what she understood is that to be with my mother-in-law was good for her soul. And she knew her mother-in-law was too old to have any more sons. But her soul was crying out. And God honored that. Now, from time to time, we, as the Lord sees fit, will share the story of Ruth. But she was 20 generations in the revelation of Jesus Christ himself. That she was a foreigner coming from a foreign land. But she followed the cry of her soul that God had mercy on her, and he did. And thank the Lord. So if your soul is seeking what is good, that is the wisest thing you can do. If there's a place in your soul that you need more of God, God is speaking to you. You just need to sit quiet and say, Lord, and listen. And it will be.